All right, it is 10 a.m. on the dot. I am going to get us started. So, without any further ado, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Uh, Today, we're going to be having a very important conversation detailing some of the key provisions of the recently passed HB 8002, an act concerning housing growth. Our panelists today will discuss some of the bill's most significant elements, including expanded fair rent commissions, incentives for housing growth in transit districts, changes to off-street parking requirements, and new requirements for housing growth plans. A quick note that Sean Gio from our team is out sick today, so Alysha Gardner, Senior Policy Analyst at the partnership, will be graciously covering his role during today's webinar. Without any further ado, at the partnership, our mission is to promote equitable change in Connecticut housing policy by coordinating advocacy, advancing research, and uniting diverse partners. And our vision is that everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home that is affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. We're also very excited to inform you guys. Many of you may already be aware, but if you are not, we are at the partnership releasing our first annual State of Housing in Connecticut 2025 report. In the chat, I'm going to have one of my team members share a link to sign up to access the report when it releases on January 16th. And also a reminder to save the date. We'll be hosting an iForum to take a deeper dive into the learnings from the State of Housing report on January 21st. It will take place at the Lyceum here in Hartford, Connecticut. So save the date. More information will be coming out to register and participate in that conversation. But definitely sign up. It's going to be a great resource for all learning related to affordable housing in Connecticut. So today's conversation, we only have the hour, so I want to be super quick in running through the agenda, but we'll wrap up the introductions shortly. Alysha will give us a high-level overview of what is in 8002. Following that, we'll have a moderated panel discussion with our amazing panelists here today, and then we'll try and use the last 15 minutes to answer any questions that you all have. On that note, please plan to use the Q&A feature. If you don't see it at the bottom of your screen, click the More button, the ellipses, 3 dots, and it should be there. Once you click that, you should have the ability to type in a question. If the question is, if we are able to get to it in time during our conversation today, it'll be included in the answered section, which you see on your screen here is pointing to. So please plan to ask any questions through that method. If you do have any tech issues or concerns or trouble hearing, you can reach out to the staff supporting today's call at the partnership through the chat feature. So please plan to use that if you have any trouble, but use the Q&A feature to engage our panelists in the questions that you have for us today. Without any further ado, I'm very excited to turn it over to Alysha to kick off today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Really appreciate it. So my name is Alysha Gardner. I'm a senior policy analyst here at the Partnership for Strong Communities, and today we are going to talk about HB 8002, an act concerning housing growth. Next slide, please. So HB 8002 was passed by the General Assembly in special session on November 13th, 2025, a little over 1 month ago, as a compromise housing bill after the governor vetoed HB 5002 last summer. It contains many similar elements, but also a lot of changes. The bill was signed by the governor just before Thanksgiving and has over 50 sections and 100 pages. So we will do our best to give a great overview, but it's a lot. So some provisions went into effect immediately, some will go into effect at the start of the year, and others will take several years to be fully implemented. It was a housing omnibus bill and covered a wide range of housing policy areas, from homeless protections, including regulating hostile architecture and implementing a portable shower pilot, to the creation of homebuyer savings accounts, to tenant protections against predatory landlord practices, to new and innovative home building and incentive programs. However, at its core, this is fundamentally a housing planning document. Its proposals will bring structure and coordination to the housing creation process statewide, defining the roles and responsibilities of the state government, the regional councils of government, and municipal leaders. All levels of government, led by the municipalities, will come together to plan for and build enough homes to meet the unique needs of each community. Next slide, please. Given the scope of the bill, we'll be unable to dive into everything, so we invite you to go to our website for a more detailed overview and a link to the Office of Legislative Research's bill analysis, which is quite thorough. Next slide. Today, we're going to frame the conversation around immediate impacts and long-term impacts. We'll talk about a few key areas of the bill that we believe will have an outsized effect on keeping homes affordable in the state and helping all families stay stably housed. Looking at immediate impacts, one key question we ask of the partnership is, if this bill is passed today, how does it help someone tomorrow? While the housing planning functions will hopefully put Connecticut on a path where more towns are actively planning and building homes that meet their residents' needs, the housing shortage is making homes unaffordable and inaccessible for many Connecticut families right now. One of the most impactful changes in the bill on that front was the expansion of the Fair Rent Commissions statewide. Fair Rent Commissions are local volunteers that can evaluate whether a rental increase is considered harsh and unconscionable, and they may require the landlord to reduce, phase in, or complete necessary maintenance on the home before implementing any major rental increases. Currently, there are over 50 Fair Rent Commissions across the state, and all towns with populations greater than 25,000 are required to have a Fair Rent Commission. Under the new law, the threshold is lowered from 25,000 to 15,000. So, 24 additional towns will create new Fair Rent Commissions or have Fair Rent Commission protections before January 1st, 2028, meaning that an additional 35,000 tenants across the state will now have the ability to appeal unfair rental increases. The statute also empowers the regional councils of governments to create Fair Rent Commissions, which municipalities can opt into in lieu of creating their own. In addition, there were some limited tenant and homelessness protection measures included, including a ban on algorithmic rent setting and proactive inspections for elevators in high-rise senior apartment complexes and fire hydrants in mobile home parks. However, some of the larger tenant protection policies, most notably just cause eviction protections, were not included in this bill. We know there's more to do in the coming legislative session to prioritize immediate housing affordability and stability concerns as the state continues to build more housing. Turning to the long-term impacts of the bill, there are many changes to ease and encourage building more homes that will help with the current housing shortage and make our state more affordable in the long run. The key feature of this bill is, of course, the housing growth plans. Because there's no statewide planning office, housing creation is led by the municipalities in a way that doesn't incorporate the needs statewide. However, as we'll get into later, this new plan will empower towns to zone and plan for specific housing creation within their town to meet their community's needs in the form of municipal housing growth plans while coordinating at the regional levels. Municipalities may also opt out of the housing growth plans by instead joining a regional housing growth plan led by their regional council of government. The state's Office of Planning and Management will work together with the councils of government to set regional housing growth goals and provide GIS tools that local planners can use to build out their plans. The first of these plans will not be published until 2028, with half the state's regions publishing in 2028 and half in 2029. There are also changes to the minimum off-street parking requirements, which we'll dive into more later. For towns that are looking to proactively increase density for walkability and climate sustainability, they've been empowered to create transit-oriented districts in this bill. Additionally, several new incentive funds will be created to help towns not only build housing, but also build the infrastructure like water, roads, wastewater systems that are required to sustain the housing creation. All right, next slide. And with that brief overview, let's meet our panelists. We're very fortunate to have the group we have today, and each one of them is an expert in their field. We really appreciate that we have a mix of housing advocates and researchers, as well as government leaders who are tasked with implementing the bill. So I'd like to introduce Sarah White, who is an attorney with the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, Rebecca Augur, the Responsible Growth Coordinator for the Connecticut Office of Policy and Management, Matt Hart, the Executive Director with the Capital Region Council of Government, and Nick Kantor, the Program Director for Desegregate Connecticut. We are so grateful to have them here. And with that, let's kick off our discussion. So we're going to start talking a little bit about the more immediate impacts of the bill. So I want to turn it over to Sarah. What are some aspects that you think will have the most immediate impact on housing affordability in the state?
Right. I think it's important to emphasize the framing that this bill is not primarily about immediate relief from rising rent or housing affordability, or really a tenants' rights bill. Like Alysha mentioned, the issues that tenants and their advocates have been most vocal about at the legislature, such as just cause eviction protection, were not included. However, there are two provisions in the bill that will provide some relief from rising rent in the immediate to medium term. Not going to solve the housing affordability crisis overall, but will help. So the first one is the expansion of required fair rent commissions to smaller towns. And then the second one is banning algorithmic rental pricing software, which is the one I'll talk about first because it hasn't gotten as much attention. So this is in section 32. RealPage is the most well-known example of this kind of product, but there are many, many more on the market. And what these products do is take proprietary, non-public information about rent and occupancy, and then they give landlords using the software a recommendation about what rent they should charge, or whether they should even leave a unit vacant in order to increase rent overall. So it's basically price fixing software. And the way, for example, RealPage has talked about this is allowing everyone's boat to rise. So all landlords being able to charge more for rent because any competition has been eliminated. So Section 32 of 8002 bans what it calls revenue management devices, which is the software, as of January 1st, 2026, which will include programs like RealPage and others that use this non-public competitor data to provide landlords about recommendations about price or vacancy. And a violation of this as of January will be a violation of our antitrust laws, which can be enforced by the Attorney General, but also privately enforced by consumers, potentially even other landlords, including attorney's fees and treble damages. So this has been one way that corporate landlords have increased rent. It's not going to solve the problem overall or is the only reason, but will help some. And then the other provision is the expansion of fair rent commissions in Section 35. So fair rent commissions are local volunteer boards with the power to halt rent increases if they find that they're unfair, or even lower rent, based on unsafe conditions that a tenant may complain about. And they really are the only practical option tenants have to complain about unfair rent increases, no matter how egregious. So it is a big deal that they are now going to be required in towns of 15,000 or more. Up till now, it's just been in the larger towns of 25,000. So this will expand fair rent commissions to about 30 more towns. Some of them do already have fair rent commissions, but will provide, a real option for tenants in the more rural or suburban parts of the state, which are increasingly seeing landlords come in and really significantly increase rent. And the other significant thing about this section is it provides a new option for fair rent commissions through the regional councils of government. It will allow a COG to create a regional fair rent commission that member towns can opt into. The Capital COG is the first one to attempt this, which we'll hear about in a little bit. And the hope is that this will allow some smaller towns to pool their resources to create fair rent commissions that are accessible to tenants, but also efficient.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And with that nod, Matt, I'd love to have you chime in and tell us what a regional fair rent commission might look like.
I'd be happy to do that. And thank you all so much for attending today. We really appreciate it. So at CROG, actually, we've been talking about this concept for a little while now, for a couple of years off and on. So before 8002. And as Sarah explained, with the passage of the law, several more towns are now more subject to the statute. And in the Krog region, I believe 5 additional towns more would have been subject, but they already had a fair rent commission in place. So there are smaller towns that have had fair rent commissions in place for some years now. But our members expressed an interest in looking at a regional model. So we conducted a survey, and our membership is comprised of 38 municipalities in the greater Hartford region. And 21 of our 38 towns responded to our survey, and 16 of them expressed an interest in looking at a regional model. So why might they be interested? For a variety of reasons, for administrative support, for professional and technical support, particularly legal. In most of our towns, the caseloads are pretty minimal. So sometimes it's hard for the commissioners to maintain, a level of expertise that they might need to properly hear a case. Also, another aspect why people might be interested, or towns might be interested in joining in a regional model, is to have access to a broader base of volunteers, people who are actually willing to serve on a commission. Because in many of our communities, it can be a real challenge to recruit people for unpaid volunteer positions. So the way we're handling this is one of my teammates, Elizabeth Sanderson, who's one of our program managers at Krog, she's staffing a work group, and we're working with the state association, Sarah and others. They've been enormously helpful. We're preparing a draft ordinance that all of the towns would need to adopt. We do think, importantly though, that each town that decides to join a regional commission would need to have somebody designated on staff to help out with triage. We would only want the commission really to hear bona fide cases. And then we would look to recruit a very representative group of commissioners from across the region and make sure that each town that decided to join was represented, that we had tenants on the group, really a good broad cross section that would comprise the commission.
Thanks so much, Matt. It sounds like there's a lot of benefits to being able to have a more representative group, a group that maybe is better trained, has a little bit better support than what some of the smaller towns are able to provide. I'd really love to hear from both you and Sarah, what are some of the strengths of this regional approach, but maybe what are some of the downsides? Like, where does it work really well and where might it not work so well?
Sarah, did you want to lead off on
Sure,
that?
yeah. So I would just say we have actually allowed for joint fair rent commissions for many years, but no towns have done it yet. So a lot of this is experimentation. I think that there are potentially benefits in regionalizing services and pooling resources to make this more effective. Two areas of challenge I see is that there is so much regional variation in what rental housing looks like. And one of the strengths of local fair rent commissions has been it is this volunteer board of laymen, not experts, the shared sense and understanding of kind of what the community is like, what the neighborhood is like, some familiarity there, because fundamentally this is what we as lawyers call an equitable decision. It's about fairness. It's not about applying a formula or looking at market rent or anything like that, about, establishing a shared understanding of what is fair or unfair in this community and, offering flexible relief. So I think that there are some challenges there if you have a commission made up of people from all over the region who may have not much understanding of what conditions are like in a particular town, or live in a town that's very different. It's not insurmountable, but it's something to think about. And then the other challenge, I think, is that having a fair rent commission rooted at the local level, often it's cited in a social services department or something similar, where there is experience working with tenants in crisis, which tenants often are when they come to the fair rent commission, facing a really big increase or unsafe conditions and not knowing what to do, and being able to provide that level of support and services and, knowledge about the other services the town might offer in terms of inspections, for conditions, leveraging those to, create an option that works for everybody. So those are some challenges to think about.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that briefly, I think Sarah did a great job explaining, what could be the primary concerns here. Would a regional group truly be sufficiently sensitive and knowledgeable about purely local issues? We would hope to be able to address that adequately through good training, and again, by recruiting a really representative group. But another model I think we're going to look at, and Sarah and her colleagues have recommended this, is could we look at sub-regional commissions? For example, if there are 4 or 5 towns in close proximity to one another, adjoining communities, could they potentially share a commission as opposed to having just one entity that serves all 38 communities? But all 38 communities aren't going to join in this. It really is going to depend in large part on how many communities at the end of the day are willing to agree to pilot this and what the geography looks like.
I really appreciate both of you sharing this because it feels like the kind of situation where there's a lot of good points on both sides for the municipal versus the regional, and kind of being aware the strengths and weaknesses of both models will allow this kind of collaboration because, as you both alluded to, we really don't know what's going to happen in the next few years, which is actually kind of exciting because it means we can create something that meets the needs of the people that we're trying to serve. So thanks so much for that brief overview. We'd like to pivot to talk a little bit more about the housing growth plans, which is one of the larger components of the bill. So I'd love to, Rebecca, have you lead off and talk a little bit about, what they are, maybe about the timeline, and in particular, what OPM's role is in the housing planning under this bill.
Sure. Thanks, Alysha, and thanks for having us here today. I'm just going to start off with your last question on OPM's role here. And I think my office, the Office of Responsible Growth, is a lesser known division within OPM. It has been around for 20 years, and we get involved with a lot of coordination among state agencies, as well as working directly with the COGS on regional planning efforts and regional service provisions. And then one of our main functions is to write the state's comprehensive plan, which really focuses on the balance between our statewide priorities for conservation as well as development. And in our latest adopted plan, which was just adopted in March, housing is one of our top 5 priorities. And we look at housing in a plan such as that, and a comprehensive plan, as, very much intertwined with several other top priorities of the state around employment, transportation, infrastructure, economic development, and other issues. And so it's important in that comprehensive planning look to ensure that we are trying to meet all of our objectives rather than sacrificing some for others. And OPM, as the author and coordinator among state agencies on the implementation of that comprehensive plan, is really well positioned to work at housing from many different angles. And I think that is an important role to think about when we look at these new housing growth plans, which are maybe bringing up the timeline slide would be helpful at this point.
Danielle, would you mind bringing that up? Thank you.
So we put together a timeline sort of in 3 tracks here, but they're all related to the housing growth plans. But the most immediate efforts are around the Regional Housing Needs Program, which OPM is supposed to establish in consultation and working directly with the COGS. We are supposed to develop guidance around the housing growth plans, which are either at a regional or municipal level, as Alysha was describing earlier, as well as guidance on the annual reporting that will be associated with those plans moving forward. OPM also houses the state's Geographic Information Officer, the GIO. He is responsible for developing data tools that towns and the regions can use in the preparation of these plans, particularly around identifying developable land. OPM then has to work with the COGS to develop statewide and regional housing growth targets, so actual numbers, and those are due by the end of 2026. The COGS then take those targets and are responsible for developing their own needs assessment and establishing municipal affordable housing goals for their member municipalities by June of 27. Once a COG publishes their affordable housing goals for their members, each town has 30 days to decide whether they're going to pursue a regional housing growth plan with the COG or do a municipal housing growth plan on their own. And so that sort of moves us into that second column. Regardless of which track you decide as a town, whether you're participating with a COG or you're going on your own, the housing growth plans are required to address several elements outlined in the legislation that OPM's guidance will help address. There are slightly different elements for the 20 communities of the state with the lowest adjusted equalized net grand list per capita, but all towns are responsible for submitting a housing growth plan, whether through the COG or on their own. As Alysha mentioned earlier, by June of 28 is the first batch, and it depends on which region of the state you are part of, and then June of 29 is the second batch. And then following submission and approval by OPM of a housing growth plan, there will be annual reporting. And the annual reporting sort of leads us into the Housing Growth Fund that is established under this legislation as one of the incentive programs. This is a program that OPM has to establish by July of 28, and it is to help provide grants to municipalities to help construct or maintain or enhance or expand water, sewer, transportation, transit infrastructure, things that are needed to support the development of new housing. And the minimum eligibility criteria outlined in the legislation is compliance with having adopted and being in the process of implementing a housing growth plan, as well as either having been determined to be a qualifying transit-oriented community, having adopted a development district with the CMDA, or some other criteria to be developed by OPM. So that's kind of a quick overview of the housing growth plans with timeline.
This is really impressive, Rebecca. We really appreciate the time that went into putting this overview together, because when you want to have everyone participate, when you want to have the municipalities and the Council of Regional Government and the State Planning Office to all coordinate and work together, there's going to be a lot of moving parts. There's going to be a lot of checkpoints where everyone can work together, and that does make things more complicated. But this is the best thing I've seen since the bill comes out, trying to lay this out. So thank you so much for walking us through that. I'd really love to hear from you and Matt to talk a little bit about OPM versus the Council of Regional Government's separate roles and responsibilities, and especially how you are planning to work together and coordinate in the coming months and years.
Rebecca, did you want to lead off, or would you like me to?
I can lead off if you want.
Great.
Sure. I'll just say that we are already coordinating. I think the Office of Responsible Growth and OPM has a great relationship with the COGS, and so we are already talking about how we're going to be rolling out all the work that is to be done here. But I think from OPM's perspective, we envision really continuing in our role as sort of a coordinating entity, and we really hope to be collaborating with the COGS on setting up the framework for the needs assessment and the establishment of the municipal affordable housing goals, working really hand in hand on the guidance around the plans themselves and the reporting mechanism there. Our goal really is just to reach a consensus with the COGS on, what do we mean by some of these terms? What is the process that we are going to go through here? What are the relevant data sets to look at when we're looking at, developable land inventories, developing the needs assessments, all of this. And We also see OPM's role as somewhat of a liaison between the new Council on Housing Development established by this legislation, um, to help sort of convey to that group what's working and what's maybe not working so great in the implementation of all of the various elements of this legislation. And so we hope to help be a conduit for, if there needs to be refinement or needs to be some interpretation of things that are included in this bill to help get it to that group, which consists of, a lot more designees of senators and representatives.
And I can just add a few brief points. So we're very fortunate to have Rebecca in her role. If you're not aware, there is a Connecticut Association of Councils of Governments. All 9 COGs are members, and over the past year, we formed an informal housing working group. So we've got planners from each of the 9 COGs. Some have some good expertise and experience with housing planning who are working together collaboratively, and we've invited Rebecca to participate in that process as well. They're currently right now reviewing the law to identify and to be able to provide technical guidance to our members on the key responsibilities for the towns as well as the COGs. And we look forward to continuing our good collaboration with Rebecca's office.
Thanks so much. And I do just want to touch a little bit on what Rebecca alluded to, the Council of Housing Development. So one piece that we really haven't spent a lot of time on in this meeting is there is created in the bill a new Council of Housing Development that is much more closely tied to the elected representatives, the state senators and representatives and their designees to not only help understand how this bill is being implemented, helping review some of the municipal plans, but also tasked with kind of studying and understanding some of the barriers to housing creation in the state. So, as Rebecca says, this role as liaison can kind of help the people who are making the laws better understand what's working, what's not, so our legislation can be more responsive as this goes on. So thank you so much. And Matt, or really anyone, but do you want to chime in and talk a little bit about what you see as some of the strengths of the regional approach that this bill is targeting?
I'd be very happy to do that. And certainly this is a component of the bill that I'm probably the most excited about. The fact that towns will have the opportunity to join in a regional housing growth plan at their option. And this is something the Municipal Coalition, I'll use that term loosely, that was the Connecticut Association of COGs, CCM, and COST. This was a key component that we advocated for. And I'll cite three reasons why I think it's important. Number one, towns will be able to leverage the planning expertise of the COGs. We support planning regions. Each COG is a planning region that really falls within our wheelhouse. Many of our towns, as we know, are small with very, very small planning departments. You might have one town planner with some administrative support who's really responsible for a wide variety of things. Staffing the commission in particular, seeing applications through. Will he or she have time to prepare a quality housing growth plan, understanding they're going to retain some professional assistance, but will they be able to do a quality job with that every 5 years? Might they be better off participating with their COG? So being able to leverage the planning expertise of the COGs. Secondly, many housing markets are more regional in scope, right? They're regional. So that's another reason behind this approach. And then lastly, and I don't want to understate this, I personally think there is tremendous value in getting towns together in the same room to work on housing planning. And at CROG here, we've got a project underway. We're preparing a regional housing strategy where we're doing things like developing model regulations. We're looking at this concept of creating a regional housing trust or a land bank. There is value in having Hartford and Glastonbury together in the same room. So those are kind of three main reasons why I would cite why I think having this option will be so valuable for our towns and our regions.
Thanks so much, Matt. Um, I want to be mindful of our time as we go through this bill. So I'd like to take a step away from the housing growth plans and talk to Nick a little bit more about the transit-oriented districts that were implemented in this bill. We like to think of it as, everyone's going to create a housing growth plan, but for the towns that are like really, really gung-ho about creating their density and their walkability, there's this option, this opt-in option, to really have some transformative downtowns. So, Nick, could you just talk through some of what's been included in the transit-oriented development portion of the bill?
Yeah, and again, thank you for having us moving this all together today. But I think you said it right there that we're really excited for this because it gives starting to give communities more of the resources to think broadly, think holistically, think strategically, think ambitiously, especially now with the Housing Growth Fund and the Housing Council on Housing Development. Sorry, I always get that wrong. Which is going to add to state capacity. So not only is it hoping to push people towards transit-oriented communities and thinking more broadly in their towns and cities, not just parcel by parcel, but more of a community basis. But it's also going to, the other side of that is the actual state capacity and the resources to do more, whether that's more funding, more grants, or more technical support. So we're really excited about that. And we think towns that want to do it, you're seeing towns opting into CMDA already and starting to, I think that's a leading indicator that there are towns who want to do this work, but just need the help. And I think that's always been at the core of this bill is making it easier for towns who want to do a good job to be able to do that and really lean on the carrot approach. And one last thing is Rebecca mentioned earlier the C&D plan. We're also really excited that the C&D plan is going to play more of a role here. Rebecca's org's done a great job making that happen, making that more come to life.
Could you
Yeah.
define CND?
Sorry, conservation and development. Rebecca, did I get
Thank
that
you.
right? Yes. Basically, it's a 5-year plan that the state went through. It's similar to that local municipalities have the plan of conservation development at the local level, but this is at the state level. But we're hopeful that this is actually going to start more statewide coordination and cooperation to actually go achieve those goals versus it being a document that sits on a shelf. So overall, I think a lot of the advocates, or I can speak for myself at Desegregated Connecticut, we're excited to see this bill actually get implemented. And the implementation's not going to be easy. And that's where a lot of the work is still to happen. Folks always say, like, what's next? And it's like, wait, time out. The work's just starting for a lot of people and actually getting a better future for Connecticut. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Nick. And also, as one of our resident zoning experts, another big piece of this bill were some changes to the parking laws statewide. Do you think you could give us an overview of what's changed around parking in the state?
Yeah, and obviously Matt, Rebecca, Sarah hop in too. But what's exciting here is a pretty ambitious move away from mandates for units for apartment for complexes, residential complexes of 16 or less. And that's exciting because parking mandates have a very high cost to building, and people don't always realize that, and they can really hurt actually building walkable communities. And so what the bill is doing is saying for 16 and under, there's no more parking requirements, a mandate, sorry. But there is a clause still for health and safety that towns can use if there's a need of considering that. And then for above 16 units, there's a plan required to look at to see what's the right amount. And also for communities that are especially worried here, there's a carve out of about 4%, two carve outs of 4%, total of 8%. Still has some caps, so it's still, I think, very reasonable. And really what you're trying to avoid is the 3 parking spots for a studio next to the train station, which happens across the state. So we really think this is going to have one of the more immediate impacts because when it goes into effect in the summer, I think it's going to be pretty fast to turn around. And then also, when you talk about parking, people, it's always complicated at times. But in Connecticut, there are communities who have removed parking mandates. Hartford is an example. Bridgeport, even Woodstock doesn't have parking requirements, surprising or not. And what you're seeing is the types of projects that you'd want to occur here. Infill development, small duplexes, those are the ones that tend not to have any parking. And when you have parking, it's less. It's less than the requirement. So maybe it's not one, maybe it's 0.7 per unit. And thus it just makes everything a little cheaper and it makes the project actually more doable. That's what I'll say about the parking, Matt. Rebecca, I don't know if anyone wants to hop in there.
I could add a few brief points and great overview there, Nick. I think in the short term, towns are certainly going to need to update their zoning regulations to accommodate the change, and the COGS will be available to assist them. And one positive I see to this is it's going to put more pressure on developers as well as municipalities to leverage existing parking facilities, right? Whether it's structured parking or surface lot. And I'm sure many of us on the call were fans of Professor Don Shoup out of UCLA, the parking dean in urban planning, right? And he talked about the high cost of free parking and how these large expansive parking lots are just one of the worst land uses imaginable. So I think I see that as a positive. We're going to certainly be more pressure to leverage existing facilities for new housing, new smaller housing developments.
It's a really great perspective. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Matt. We do want to make sure we leave time for Q&A, but I want to end with one final question to all the panelists. Other than all of the parts we've already discussed, what is another part of this massive housing omnibus bill that you believe will be really meaningful for housing affordability that you think there should be more attention to?
Anyone can start.
Go ahead. Yeah, anyone can start.
Okay. I'll start with there's some provisions that I think can really strengthen local public housing authorities' activities. And so one is there's a grant program that DOH is to step up on middle housing for public housing authorities. And there's incentives to for small housing authorities that really don't have the technical capacity to do development work to work with neighboring public housing authorities to construct units within their jurisdictions. So those are in sections, I think it's 27 and 41. And I think that has the potential to really help some communities, especially smaller communities, develop appropriate types of deeply affordable housing.
Very exciting stuff. Matt, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but very excited about the first-time home buyer savings accounts and the tax benefits for those employers who wish to contribute. I think that this bill will also support the development of home ownership, right? Home ownership and also that linkage, the importance of workforce housing for a strong and viable economy, that the state supports at the state level. So excited about that component of the law as well.
I'll jump in next. I'm excited for the water and sewer study and the grant associated with water and sewer. Water and sewer is something that a lot of municipalities talk a lot about. And, we can just look to recent events in Waterbury of how important our water infrastructure is and how much attention it's going to need. And I think this is going to be a great example of state capacity coming together, working across the elements of the state to come with a good overview, good understanding of water and sewer in Connecticut. And then hopefully towns can use that so they don't have to go out every time they want to do something and have studies redone over and over again. So I think the water and sewer study and the grant associated therein is going to be really exciting.
And I'm interested to see about the authority the bill gives to the Department of Housing to act as a statewide housing authority to develop state land and possibly other land as well. Just what can be done here to build more housing that's publicly owned and that's affordable to a wide variety of residents.
Thanks so much. There's really a lot to look forward to this bill, and this is just the start of many conversations I think we'll have in the coming months and years. So check back in the future as we start to see more implementation of all the different aspects of this bill. We like to open it up for Q&A now. As Danielle shared, we'll direct you to use the Q&A box. If you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a More circle with 3 dots. You click on that, you can get to the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. We just like to keep in mind that as these programs are in development and the bill is just a month old, we'd request that the questions focus around clarifying and less speculative, because at this point there's a lot we don't know, but we're going to do our best. So we already have quite a few great questions. Nick, I'd actually like to kick one off that's to you directly. Could you explain more about what opting in looks like for a community that might be quite removed from being a transit-oriented district but wants to plan for that in the future?
Yeah, and I think I'll bucket this also, Rebecca, hop in. So there's some implementation aspects of this too, like the mechanical, how does one opt in? But not only is there a definition for a qualified transit-oriented community, there's also an option for an adjacent community, which gives more flexibility to towns who may not have the transit within their community yet, but want to plan towards that.
Thanks so much, Nick. There have been several questions actually that are repeating each other. Does the housing growth plan replace the affordable housing plan requirement?
I'll jump in. Yes, one of the last sections of this legislation actually repeals 8-30J.
Okay, so there we have it. This is a good question, and I'll take a first stab at answering, but I'd love to hear all of your thoughts because, again, it is a very big bill. Question from Sarah Locke. Does 8002 include any sections addressing 1, the preservation of existing housing that qualifies as affordable, and 2, deeply affordable housing for those making less than 30% AMI? And from what I understand of the bill, largely, those are not the areas of focus of this bill. There are some innovative housing creation programs that could be fulfilled by focusing on the preservation or the targeting, but largely, especially these housing growth plans, I don't believe there's a component that requires a focus on deeply affordable. But I'd love to be corrected if anyone knows about these plans or any other aspect of the bill.
I'll just jump in, Alysha, that for those communities that are in the bottom 20 of the adjusted equalized net grand list per capita, there are some different elements that their housing growth plans are supposed to address, including preservation of affordable units, reducing displacement from new affordable housing development, and a couple of other provisions that I can't recall right off the top of my head. But there is recognition that for some communities that already have a significant amount of affordable housing, their growth plans are going to look different and need to address some different elements.
Thanks, Rebecca. Does anyone else want to chime in? I do have my handy summary pulled up, so I will say there are a few provisions that, while not addressing the housing component, there's a direct rental assistance pilot, there's reestablishment of an open choice voucher program. So leveraging the vouchers and the rental assistance program that the state already has, there's ways in this bill to kind of expand who's able to access those programs. As well as some new Public Housing Authority annual reporting that does require the Public Housing Authority to publish much more detailed, including income targeted information on the housing in their town. So there'll be more transparency around that income targeting as a result of this bill. All right. So we have a question for Sarah about the enforcement mechanisms for the ban on the algorithmic rent setting.
Right. So it states that it's a violation of Connecticut's Antitrust Act to continue to use rent setting software for residential housing. So the enforcement mechanisms are just those contained in the antitrust law. And while I've done a lot of cases under the Unfair and Deceptive Practices Act, I've never done one under the Antitrust Act, but I did look at it. And it both gives authority to the Attorney General to enforce it for an injunction to stop it, as well as damages, but also has a private right of action. So a consumer, a tenant who's harmed by the continuing use of these practices, or I think potentially also a competitor of a landlord that's still using these, could also sue both for an injunction to stop the practice, but also for monetary damages, including 3 times their actual damages and attorney's fees, which are important to make it actually viable for someone to bring a lawsuit.
Thanks, Sarah. Sounds like there's some good stuff baked in there. All right. So we have a question. We have several questions actually about fair rent commissions as well. So anyone can chime in on these. One is, does anyone have suggestions on how to recruit members for fair rent commission? Because even some larger towns have a hard time filling their quorums. And then secondly, what is the legal weight of a fair rent commission decision?
I can address the legal weight one first, and then I'm curious to hear other people's ideas about recruitment. So a fair and commission decision does have the force of law. It is not optional. It's something that the landlord does have to follow if there's an order lowering rent or another kind of order from the Fair Rent Commission. And the Fair Rent Commission also does have enforcement power as well. It can issue a cease and desist if the landlord is not following the order or is engaging in retaliation. It can also levy fines and potentially enforce its order in court as well. So it is not merely optional. It does need to be followed. And in most cases I've seen, usually the landlord is abiding by it. But of course there are exceptions. And then I think in terms of recruitment, I mean, I think an issue we have with fair rent commissions more generally is that a lot of people still don't know what they are and that they're available. And that, certainly applies to tenants who might benefit from them, but also the public as well, who might be interested in serving on them. So I think that there's local work there to let people know about this opportunity and to try to maybe intentionally recruit some people. Usually it's a mix of like residents of the town, but tenants, landlords, homeowners, some combination of those. But also all of us, like statewide, to really get the word out that these are available and that this is an opportunity, a really important one, to serve the community that's incredibly valuable. Because like I said earlier, this is really the only option tenants have, even if their rent is being doubled. So it is an incredibly important role that community members can play to serve on a commission.
Yeah, and I can add briefly to that. I think, to emphasize Sarah's point, outreach, that's what we're contemplating. So the towns that are looking at participating, utilizing their media to reach their residents, I think outreach to tenant organizations, other advocacy groups would be important as well. As Sarah talked about, having those informational sessions, what is a fair rent commission? What's it all about? And then another point, which we haven't explored in too much detail yet, but perhaps stipends. We might want to consider that. I know municipalities across the country are increasingly utilizing that model for boards and commission members.
Thanks for sharing, and especially when you're looking to get a diverse representation, some people have more available free time to volunteer for these very time-intensive commissions. And I'll say in my experience talking with various groups that have recruited members of fair rent commissions, working with the local political parties and members is another option, because you have a lot of like really gung-ho people working in the political parties that are already very actively involved in the municipality. And I know many towns have requirements that there's representatives from explicitly both political parties on the board. So it's a great way, to reach out to some very active community members as well. And I think someone was reading your mind, Matt, because we actually have a question directed to you, not about Fair and Commission specifically, but could you walk us through what your COG is doing to educate everyone in your COG about this bill?
A great question. So as we talked about earlier, we are coordinating with the Connecticut Association of COGs. We've got our housing housing work group that is preparing a summary of the bill in collaboration with Rebecca's office. The last thing we want is to put out information that conflicts. So we're working to make sure we're all on the same page. That's going to clearly spell out what the responsibilities are for the towns as well as the COGs under the law. And we're looking to make that information available after the holidays in January. We're also collaborating with CCM, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, and COST, the Connecticut Association of Small Towns, to host various informational workshops and seminars early next year. And we expect this will be an ongoing effort over the winter and spring.
Thanks so much, Matt. We'll look forward to more. And I'm sure if anyone wants to hear more, you can look at CCM, COS website, the CROG website, and sign up for notifications for some of those events. All right. We have one question that we're going to wrap up on, and this one, it's more directed towards Nick, but I really think everyone in housing can speak to some of these aspects. The question is specifically about South Windsor, but more generally for towns that are underserved with transit. Can pieces of this legislation help in expanding transit into these communities like Bus Rapid? Are there ways to incentivize or help towns kind of build out their capacity here?
I think at the core, that's a lot of what this bill will start to do, as it is a planning bill, and seeing where people are going to develop and grow and better coordinate across agencies to do it. Obviously, no one can promise anything on this call. Like, I imagine every town is always going to say we want more, 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 and like that's a different problem, but hopefully a better problem. But the hope and intent is through state capacity and planning, it makes it easier for folks in municipalities to try to figure out how they could garner resources from the state to achieve the goals that they want to do. But Matt, Rebecca, hop in there if you sort of see it differently.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Rebecca.
Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I think you're right on point there, and that's a major focus of the Housing Growth Fund. And towns can collaborate with the CMDA, the Connecticut Municipal Development Authority, to support good projects and to help finance the infrastructure needed to support and build transit-oriented communities.
And you've seen great examples of when people are working together. Look at Meriden, for example. I think it's like the classic case that everyone talks to of a lot of state agencies coming together to really transform an area. Same thing, Naugatuck right now is going through a pretty brand redevelopment, bringing a lot of pieces together. And I think that ambition is what we're going to advocate for throughout the implementation phase for this, is that the prioritization for the Housing Growth Fund is going to go towards those who are being most ambitious. It's right where on Rebecca's slide it said an or between CMDA or whether you have a transparency community or something else. But we're hopeful that the Housing Council of Development is going to be prioritizing funding based on who's being most ambitious. And hopefully that will drive more exciting projects.
And I'd just like to add to that it's another benefit in my mind of a regional planning approach to addressing housing, is that those regional plans can really help identify, here's what's missing in this community, and wow, the community adjacent to it could also benefit from some investment that is on a more regional level. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity. The plans require that, what is needed to make, this target achievable for you be identified. And that's going to be different things in different communities, including things around public transit.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And we are at time, so big virtual round of applause to all of our panelists for coming and talking to us today. I've learned so much. We're really grateful. Before you all leave, we have a QR code to take a survey. We'd really appreciate everyone who's on this call to share their thoughts, so we can continue to provide these types of free educational events in the future and make sure they're tailored to your needs. I also want to say to everyone whose questions we didn't get to, if you're here, if you're asking questions, it shows that you care very deeply about these issues. So I encourage you to reach out to your elected officials locally at the state level and, let them know what you want in your community. Let them know what you're looking for, because with these municipal housing growth plans, they're going to be looking for their engaged citizens to provide feedback on what they want. So now's a great time to start engaging and saying, we want that bus rapid transit. We're curious about this aspect. We want more of the fair rent commissions in our town. So reach out to your elected officials and share your questions and concerns with them. Um, Once again, we're very grateful, Sarah, Rebecca, Matt, Nick, for all of your expertise, for your thoughts today, and thank you all for joining us.